You guys all know how much I love to burn across the universe those perverts who stepped out of their fantasy and were let up out of the darkness that they crawled out of by the man himself, the Hanson. There is just so much to be learnt, from observations of those hebephiliacs, the old and the young hebos, though they are only one of the types of sex offenders that paraphilia, hebophilia, but it is that paraphilia, hebophilia, which makes up so much a large percentage of adults who prey upon kids. And with the Predator series, what we got was the ability to not just learn that there were so many of these men that are in chat rooms that are engaging in sex crimes with children, that so many of these men are out there, existed. Because before the Predator series, unless you were law enforcement, nobody had an idea that there were so many of these male adults out there in the community. In everybody's community, because it can't just be one, because it isn't. Once you get over the shock of it, right? Once you get over the shock of, God damn, there's a lot of these perverts out there, then you can start putting together the numbers. And because when it comes to society, the wider the community, it's the mass that adds up. And what do I mean by that? Well, by watching the series, you can learn more about that type of subject of which it is, about what it does to prey upon victims, the strategies and tactics used by these deviants, and how to groom and prey upon children. And as Christopher Wobbins once said, I think that the more you can understand these guys, the better you can find ways to protect kids. And it is so true. And that's one of the reasons why I find the Predator series so good. That's why I watch a lot of his stuff, man. And he's still out there on True Blue, so make sure, because he's still out there lighting these perverts up, protecting kids. And him and the Ghost team and Grady Judd from Polk County and all of those good old girls and boys, they are a firewall. A really, really bright one. So let's get back to this. So some of the other stuff you can get from further observations and looking at these hebephiliacs, that being a hebephiliac isn't attributable to any one thing, right? It's not that a certain age or a type of religion, work status, social status, and there isn't any one thing, biological, anatomical, theoretical, philosophical, and all the other cools along the way, that by watching To Catch a Predator series, that the hebephiliac can be anyone. Well, almost anyone. Because you see, by watching TCAT, you see that the hebephiliac can be anyone but a woman. Because it showed us on the program that it wasn't some kind of split between 50-50, 90-10, that it was none. And I'm sure it's one of those questions that Mr. Hanson would have been asked time and time again. Where are all the woman hebephiliacs? Because you see, the type of paraphilia is like other types of paraphilia. It's both sexes which have it. But with this type of paraphilia, it seemed that female hebephilias were none. Also, next to none, that it didn't seem to exist. And that's kind of true, but only for that data set. Because you see, from that particular data pool of research subjects, and those subjects, those hebephiliacs, those adults that will sexually exploit, groom and prey upon children, were from chat rooms online. You see? And inside HRD, inside observations, that's the variable which we call the landscape variable or the environmental variable. So we know that in this environmental variable, that female sexual predators don't use this environment. So what environment variable do they exist in?
Now something that's being called an epidemic, and it has nothing to do with the Ebola crisis. It's a wave of teachers accused of sex crimes. In fact, an independent group estimates 1 in 10 children will be the victim of teacher sexual misconduct.
Teacher is facing serious charges. Officers say she had sex with a 15-year-old student.
Bradenton police say 31-year-old Cassandra Moore, who also goes by Mrs. Thomas, met the 15-year-old student while working as his teacher,
highlighting a disturbing pattern emerging across the nation.
City school teacher accused of sexual misconduct with a child.
The 6th grade teacher was first arrested last week at Lincoln Acres Elementary School on felony charges of sexual misconduct with a child. She bailed out of Las Colinas Women's Detention Facility, but was arrested again days later on additional charges, including possession of child pornography, what allegedly happened in the classroom between Ma and the then 12-year-old child.
Last hour, we learned a teacher accused of having an inappropriate relationship with 2 students students was relieved of duty.
She's alleged to have had relationships with a 13 and 14-year-old girl.
Two students, 13 and 14, tell HISD police they had a relationship with Holland Middle School teacher Destiny Hillsman last year. The 25-year-old is charged with a count of indecency with a child and improper relationship with a student, stemming from those allegations.
A former student teacher aide accused of engaging in sex acts with a junior high student.
Yeah, you know, it is really a disturbing case here, guys. It's crime of this woman here. This is Anna DeTuro and a 14-year-old student engaging in sexual acts.
A judge issues a felony warrant for an Arkansas teacher accused of having sex with a student.
Prosecutors formally charged Crystal Vega Friday with felony sexual assault. According to court documents, the 40-year-old, quote, admitted she had a texting relationship and that some of their texts had crossed the line. According to court documents, last month, a 16-year-old reported to Russellville police that he had sex with the teacher at a park.
She became close and befriended an 8th grader. That's when prosecutors say the grooming began.
A Madison teacher is under arrest accused of sexually assaulting a student.
Allison Marchese, a teacher at Daniel Hand High School, was charged today.
37-year-old Allison Marchese turned herself in to Madison police Wednesday night, facing charges she had sex with a student from Daniel Hand High.
What's poppin'? Brand new year and I'm locked in. Far as this teaching go, I am unreachable. I'm number one in your top 10. Miss Williams, been poppin'. 2020 new school, you're dropping. No COVID-19, ain't worried about a thing when it come to me, ain't no stopping. I can teach a class.
Williams was arrested, however, Tuesday after a video of her in bed with a minor surfaced on social media.
Just in, a teacher at Hialeah Middle School is under arrest for allegedly having an affair with a 14-year-old former student. 31-year-old Brittany Lopez Murray was booked into jail in Miami-Dade tonight. She faces several charges. Police reports said she had multiple sexual encounters with a boy in her car.
School teacher arrested and accused of sexually abusing one of her former students. Gridley police investigators say they discovered explicit pictures of Sycamore Middle School teacher Michelle Solis on a student's phone and found evidence of sexual abuse.
Michelle Solis, a 20-year teacher in the Gridley Unified School District, was arrested on Monday morning for allegedly having sex with a former student.
A former middle school teacher charged with sexually assaulting her 8th grade student.
33-year-old Taisha Bolden of Brown Deer started texting with her 13-year-old student. They say that progressed to a sexual relationship, a gun as a birthday present, and now serious charges.
Accused of having sex with a 13-year-old boy, her student, and buying him a handgun. Prosecutors say Taisha Bolden of Brown Deer was the boy's teacher at Pilgrim Lutheran School in Wauwatosa and began to cross a line quickly, exchanging personal text messages.
They looked at his phone and found numerous messages with his teacher where the teacher was expressing her love for him, as well as they saw explicit images of the teacher on his phone.
Police say the boy eventually told them the two had sex, and Bolden gave him a handgun for his 14th birthday in June.
Well, she's a teacher accused of having sex with her student and getting pregnant. Now she's in trouble again.
Court documents tell the story of a 24-year-old former English teacher and her lengthy sexual relationship with a 14-year-old student. The story takes a turn when prosecutors say Vera became pregnant by the teen and later had an abortion when questioned about the relationship.
So let me get this right. You've had sex with a student 4 times. You videoed it, and the witnesses tell us it's been shown around to the football team. Like, girl, what is wrong with you? Did you burn through your last 5 brain cells? So she's locked up in the county jail, and I anticipate that's where she'll spend Christmas eating turkey off of a loaf.
26-year-old Megan Jordan indicted and charged with sex crimes against a student. The prosecution planning an easier path to circuit court, according to CBS 6 legal expert Todd Stone.
The fact that this was charged with a direct indictment rather than an arrest warrant, it's a smart and efficient way for a prosecutor to charge a case like this because they depend on the testimony of a juvenile, which sometimes, you know, can be shaky. And so it eliminates one additional hearing that the juvenile would have to go through in order to get it up to circuit court. It was not something that she forced him to do, something that he agreed to do, but the law recognizes that a 13 or 14-year-old can't really agree to do that legally. So there are very serious offenses. They call for not just a period of incarceration, but also the sex offender registry for life.
26-year-old science teacher Stephanie Peterson walked into her first appearance at the Volusia County Jail this afternoon, hoping to be released with just a promise that she would be back to court. Volusia County Sheriff's deputies say Peterson engaged in a sexual relationship with a 14-year-old former student of hers. Peterson was charged with 2 counts of lewd and lascivious battery and 1 count of sending harmful material to a minor.
A Tangipahoa Parish teacher is in jail tonight, accused of having sex with a student.
Morgan Furchet was a 7th grade PE teacher at Lorandra Middle School until sometime last week when she resigned. The victim's parents filed a report with the sheriff's office saying the relationship started years ago.
Hard to believe, but this teacher is grinning ear to ear as she poses for a police mugshot. Sarah Fulks was arrested for allegedly having a sexual relationship with a teenage student. Her lawyer says she's smiling in the mugshot because she knows she's innocent.
Respected by her peers, beloved by students.
Welcome to week 2 of our online learning.
But now, Marka Bodine has just pleaded guilty to sexually abusing a 13-year-old student.
Teacher was caught texting and Facebook messaging with a student to meet up for sex. 25-year-old Tanisha Dixon, a teacher at Anclote High School, has been arrested, charged with having sex several times last year with a 17-year-old student.
A high school teacher in York County is facing felony and misdemeanor charges tonight. Krista McAllister is accused of taking indecent liberties with a child.
Faces 2 felony and 2 misdemeanor counts in connection to an inappropriate relationship with a student.
Kaipa High School teacher has been arrested for unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor.
A major bombshell was dropped in court today during sentencing for a special ed teacher who had sex with a student. Kelly Watson admitted before our cameras that she is pregnant with that student's baby.
She's granted, Kelly Watson sobbed during her sentencing hearing. The former special ed teacher at Avista High School for students with emotional and behavioral problems was arrested in August for having sex with a 16-year-old boy. She pleaded guilty in November, and now she says she is 7 months pregnant with that boy's child. The boy, now 17, also cried in court while holding a sonogram of his unborn child, and he too professed his love for his former teacher, twice his age.
Sexual predators, I'd call them sex addicts. I'd call them people who misuse their power.
Psychologist Dr. Michael Mantell says sexual relationships between teachers and students don't just happen.
Oftentimes people go into these professions, teaching, coaching, because they have the best selection process available.
So that's where we find them, right? That's where we find them, over that variable, the teachers' schools, the female adult that sexually attacks kids. And when you observe them, just like those hebephiliac perverts over there at the Predator series, you can find out more about them so as to make it safer for kids. Now, I'll get back to these guys in a second, but first, for this, we have to go back over to this type, the TCAP predators, and look at the environmental variable, the chat rooms, and what that allowed us to learn to help prevent attacks on kids. And here's the thing, the only way that we have learned really anything is because of how dumb these clowns are in taking the bait. The only way we know that they are out there is to draw them out. Flush them out. Do whatever you can legally, lawfully, but most important, reasonably, right? It has to be fair. And that definitely includes the use of and up to a decoy. They were able to identify the bad guy, and the outcome of that is it saves a kid. When protecting something, someone, or some many, that we call a firewall. It's a layer of protection between the pervert and the kid. The Hanson, the ghost, the sheriffs, and the judge. It's what we call the firewall. And that's the big thing about the bitch of a thing about it. About what? Well, the thing is, that particular tactic of a firewall can't be used in the teaching environment of schools. No decoys, no Hanson, no one. Because the environment, that variable, does not allow or afford you the ability to use that tactical measure for the firewall. The person of whom you as a parent hold responsible for being that firewall is the teacher, the principal, and everyone else inside any education institution. So, in strategy, when you are not able to, for whatever reasons, to not use a tactic which offsets a risk, a firewall, you still have to find other ways to offset that risk. And one of those ways in strategy and tactical is by increasing the power of a variable, one that already exists within the environment, and offset that risk again. And that, I believe, that variable in the setting of these teachers would be punishment. The variable of punishment. What they should do, I think, is increase the punishment severely for a person within a role, in any role of which meets the criteria of an authority figure inside any educational system or institution. There should be mandatory decades in prison. And that should be right across the board. That should be in everybody's country, and that should be equal. The problem with it is, it's not. Sentences vary wildly all over the place in all countries, all states, or boroughs, or unions, or regions. The thing is, it should be the same, and it should be severe, and it just isn't. And it also isn't a lot of the times when it comes to male and female. Luckily, in some states in America, they do uphold severe penalties, but others just see it as a joke.
Another woman who admitted having sex with several of her young students is about to begin a 4-year prison sentence.
This morning, an Albemarle County teacher is sentenced on sex charges with a minor. Amelia Tapp will serve 2 years in prison.
She's already been sentenced in neighboring Oakland County. There, Judge Nancy Grant sentencing the Madison Heights teacher to 6 to 15 years in prison on similar charges of having inappropriate sexual contact with a 15-year-old male student.
In accordance with the sentence imposed in her other case to 72 months to 180 months in the custody of the Michigan Department of Corrections.
As a judge sentenced Kevin Belo to 6.5 years behind bars.
A former high school teacher will spend behind bars for having sexual relations with students. Corey French will spend 3 years at Florida State Prison and 5 months of probation.
Teacher will spend 5 years in prison after pleading guilty to sexually assaulting a student.
John Austin Hopkins was convicted of 34 counts of gross sexual imposition for touching 28 first-grade girls. That charge carries a sentence of between 1 and 5 years each. Judge Robert Peeler sentenced him to 3 years on many of the counts and then 5 years on the remaining counts. Both sets of those will be served concurrently, meaning at one time. Judge Peeler then combined both groups into one and sentenced Hopkins to 8 years in prison.
Now has to register as a Tier 2 sex offender for the next 25 years. She was also sentenced to 6 months in the Monday program at River City Corrections, which is basically a treatment program.
Kuna middle school teacher who pleaded guilty to lewd conduct and child enticement was sentenced to 60 years in prison.
The former teacher caught secretly recording over 100 high school students undressing has learned his fate. A judge sentenced Mark Ackett, the former Bloomingdale teacher and girls track coach, to 15 years in prison.
Friday morning, Judge Michael McSpadden formally sentenced the former Aldine ISD middle school teacher to 10 years behind bars.
She apologized in court right before she was sentenced to 2 years in prison.
40-year-old Leticia Lowry will spend the next 20 years behind bars.
Was sentenced to 10 years for that relationship with an 8th grader.
Right. This one here, right? This one here is a little bit interesting, and the reason is because you actually get to hear what the Hebephiliacs lawyers said in court, what the lawyer put forward as a congruent argument to refute, reach some kind of modicum for a defense to say that the actions of what this Hebephiliac chick teacher did wasn't really her fault, but the fault of the environment and extenuating circumstances and all the other shit that goes into it. It's gold. So look, you hear what they put forward, and then listen to what the prosecution said. And these things are just the same as the male hebos, just the same as these serial sexual offenders. They are sick. They are hebephiliac, and they are guilty.
brought in a clinical psychologist who says that she labeled Vera as emotionally needy with a combination of someone who has an urge to be a strong nurturer. She said that comes from an abusive past, but this psychologist also said that Vera crossed boundaries as a teacher and claims that Stovall Middle School has a culture of teachers socializing with their students. Now, Vera's attorney continuously labeled Vera as a cooperative person because she responded to authorities and she was open and honest with the psychologist. But the prosecutor in this case said that's absolutely false, citing that Vera moved in with the victim's father in an effort to hide the relationship she was actually having with the victim, claiming that this was to lie or minimize the crime and was in turn uncooperative. The prosecutor said that they found other text messages on Vera's phone implying inappropriate relationships with students, not necessarily sexual relationships, but encouraging one student to date another and then opening her home up for students to have sex there. Vera also has a 6-year-old child, and that 6-year-old was calling this 13-year-old victim in this case her dad. The judge said that Vera knew what she was doing was wrong, but believes that this was a one-time thing. He said that it didn't necessarily go against Vera's punishment, but that the victim's mother wrote a letter in all of this, and he said it was worded in a way that almost sounded like it was excusing the behavior and blaming it on a cultural acceptance. The judge said that the laws will never be on the side of whatever cultural reference that she was insinuating in that letter. He did, in fact, again, sentence her to 10 years for sexual assault of a child.
Former teacher at Cypress Springs High School is going to prison for 8 years for having an improper relationship with a student.
Megan was sentenced to 3 years probation, but probation that begins with a year in jail. He'll also have to register as a sex offender for life.
Former Henry County teacher sentenced to serve 18 years in prison after pleading guilty to molesting a student and sending sexual pictures to 2 teens.
Former Collier County teacher accused of having sex with a 17-year-old girl will spend 8 years in jail.
Breaking news from Smithfield. A judge has sentenced a former Sunday school teacher to decades in prison for sexually abusing children.
And a judge sentenced him to between 87 and 109 years in prison.
St. Lucie middle school teacher will spend the rest of his life in prison.
5 years is the sentence for former Oldham County High School teacher in the rape of an underage student. Haley Reed pleaded guilty in March to 3rd-degree rape and 1st-degree unlawful illicit sex acts with a minor.
Brittany Zamora, the former Goodyear teacher, will spend the next 20 years behind bars.
Outrage and anger tonight after a former Tomball ISD teacher is sentenced to 60 days in jail and 10 years probation. Marco Bodine entered a guilty plea after having a 3-year relationship with a student.
Some feel the punishment was not harsh enough. KPRC2's Bryce Newberry is joining us live at the Harris County Courthouse in downtown Houston with more on this. Bryce?
Lauren, this sentence sparking outrage for several reasons. One of them, that this teacher who pled guilty to sexually abusing her middle school student still tonight is not here in jail. Marka Bodine's class, police arrested the Tomball ISD teacher for sexual abuse of a child. Court documents allege she befriended the 13-year-old student on an online video game and sexually assaulted him for 3 years. They texted, exchanged explicit photos and videos, and had sex in her classroom and car several times. Harris County District Judge Greg Glass handing down a sentence of 60 days in jail and 10 years probation, far shy of prosecutors' push for at least 20 years in prison. Parents like Kratke share that frustration.
I really have no idea how 60 days could be sufficient for such a crime, for such a young child.
In a statement, Bodine's defense attorney tells KPRC2 in part, the court has the obligation to make findings of what is in the best interest of society as well as the victim in determining the sentence, and we believe the judge followed the law and handed down an appropriate punishment.
Developing right now an apology to her victims, then handcuffs and a prison sentence for Jennifer Fichter. The Polk County English teacher who had sex with 3 of her students will be locked up for a long time.
Now, the state wanted her to be sentenced to 25 years. The judge downgraded that, but not by very much. She got 22 years. She's also going to be labeled a sexual offender.
I'm sorry
to the victim and his family. I'm sorry to my family. I'm sorry to our town. I'm sorry to New Smyrna Beach High School, Volusia County Schools.
Megan Paris.
I'm going to sentence you to 30 months in the custody of the Florida Department of Corrections.
4 to 15 years in prison for each of the 6 counts of criminal sexual conduct, and for delivery of drugs to a minor, 4 to 8 years. All the sentences to run concurrently.
Sobbing hysterically in court, a special ed teacher is sentenced for having sex with 5 students.
Hansen was a special education teacher at Centennial High School in Corona. She pleaded guilty to sexually abusing 5 students, one as young as 14. Hansen will spend 3 years in prison, but could get off early because of good behavior. The prosecutor's office, interestingly enough, opposed this sentence. This was a deal made with the judge and the defendant.
In court this afternoon, Jennifer Fichter sat silently listening to a recorded phone conversation between her and the mother of one of the boys she slept with last year.
So you're telling me that y'all possibly had sex 20 or 30 times?
Yeah, I guess.
Wow.
The mother of that child said she wanted to hear her version about what happened between the two.
With everything that's going on, you still want to continue having a relationship?
Also during that conversation, Fichter admits she got pregnant with the boy's child and had an abortion.
He just said that you came and told him that you were pregnant and that you had an abortion. Okay. And you think how long, Jennifer, do you think this has been going on?
The whole reason that he didn't want to tell you was simply because we didn't want to hide anything.
But I want you to look at this. The real battle started outside of that courtroom, both sides getting into a feisty exchange after the judge decided he would not ease up on the 22-year sentence for former teacher Jennifer Fichter.
You have no clue.
Today, just feet outside the courtroom, tempers flared between Jennifer Fichter's mother and the victim's parents.
Is your son alive? Is he alive? Is yours? Is he alive? Your daughter is. My daughter is. Stop it. You taking my life away.
The two had to be separated by other family. The tension came after an emotional day in court. The former Lakeland teacher who admitted to having sex with 3 students found out the judge will not give her a break on the heavy 22-year sentence he handed down a year and a half ago. The parents of one of the teen boys pushed for a harsh sentence, and that seemed to anger Fichter's family.
We had to make a decision.
Good.
I
Well, I'm glad you
couldn't
can live with your
another person's
decision.
wife, and I did because
Good.
your
I'm
daughter
glad. You
put
can
us
live
in
with
that
it.
predicament.
You can live with it.
Former dance teacher Caitlin Wilkes was once again standing before Judge Cynthia Westcott Rice, this time pleading guilty to a bill of information, charging Wilkes with 6 counts of sexual battery. Wilkes sexually assaulted a 12-year-old girl 5 times over a 3-month period. She was convicted of 5 counts of gross sexual imposition in May, 3 of which were lesser included offenses on rape charges. She was found not guilty on 2 additional counts of rape. Wilkes received a 3 to 4.5 years prison sentence. Wilkes will have to register as a Tier 3 sex offender for the rest of her life, which places some restrictions on her once she's released from prison.
One teacher with a hidden camera and sinister motives betrayed the trust of 125 students. Disgraced Bloomingdale High School teacher Mark Hackett pleaded guilty today to secretly recording his students undressing. And earlier tonight, a judge sentenced Hackett to 15 years in prison.
The former junior high school teacher who had sex with a minor will spend a year behind bars. Vanessa Jean Hooker was arrested back in December after Kern County Sheriff's detectives found that she had sex with 3 former students. Last month, Hooker pled no contest to sexual penetration with a victim under 18 and contact with a minor with intent to commit a sexual offense. Hooker has been sentenced to a year in jail, 3 years probation, needs to seek sex offender counseling, and will have to register for life as a sex offender.
She admitted to sexting a 12-year-old in order to keep him interested in school, but this Bay Area teacher was convicted of much more than that, and now she's going to prison for a very long time.
Harsh words from the judge to Ethel Anderson this afternoon. He told her, "You groomed this boy, took his innocence for your own deviant desires, and for that, you must pay."
My sentence is that on counts 1 through 3, you'll be sentenced to 15 years in Florida State Prison.
By the time the judge was done, Ethel Anderson learned she'll be spending the next 38 years behind bars.
despite what the court might see. I'm not a sexual predator.
Prosecutors are painting the 31-year-old as just that, a predator. A jury found Anderson guilty of luring a 12-year-old boy into a sexual affair that happened during tutoring sessions at her home. Anderson took the stand in her own defense, providing an explanation for her actions that ultimately backfired when she told the court the text messages were fantasy and an instructional technique to keep the boy's attention.
Covering Volusia County, a former teacher convicted of having sex with a middle school student will be spending the next 3 years behind bars.
I want to get back to these hebephiliac school teachers inside this variable, the environment that these sickos prey within. And you can get study reports which show you how these things operate when it comes to strategies in obtaining their prey. Here's a chronology of the actions and behaviors that teachers, hebephiliacs, use. You know it as the term grooming, but another word is tactics, and it's part of a strategy. And these tactics, when you put them together, make up the most common strategy that these sickos use to isolate a child so as they can use it in their twisted fantasy. Now, that's for both men and women teachers. Now, something else we know about the hebos from the educational environment, and it shows us a difference between the male and the female hebephiliacs, and that is how they get caught, is that male sex predators are more likely to get caught after the victim makes a direct claim on the school administration finds out, or direct way by law enforcement being told, where female sex predators are more likely to get caught because of gossip and reports from students, or by the victim's parents or guardians finding out themselves. Now, there are still more male than female teacher hebephiliacs, right? Estimates put it around 30% of all student sex offences are committed by female teachers or teachers' aides or those people within that environment. And the bitch about that environment variable and not having that firewall to catch these teacher hebephiliacs is that it makes it even more of a bitch that population sizes aren't going down and the data, the numbers are just increasing. And the third and final thing that I will say that you can make from observations, and that is this. For some reason, the female hebephiliac, and when they assault a child, it is in some media portrayed as different than when they do exactly what the male hebephiliac does, that for some reason it isn't as bad. For instance, we'll use a TCAP in Hanson, and all of those hebephiliacs that got busted, right, destroyed by the flame of fame. Each one of them to us is pathetic and funny as the next. Now, out of all of those pervs, there are not very many, if any, who have thought, right, I think it's a good idea that if I should go back on TV and tell people my side of the story and just explain things. They know that there is no fucking way that they could smooth any of this stuff over because of the stigma associated to those things that hurt our kids. And the thing is, that's a male, and that's a male and a decoy, a made-up kid. And that's the power that the community, society has when it comes to the stigma against those people that hurt kids, especially use them for self-gratification. And that's the way it should be looked at. And it's good that those hebephiliacs feel that way. But unfortunately, and it is unfortunate, we still need to change the way in which female teacher hebephiliacs are viewed by society.
After the sentencing, Zamora's attorney appeared to blame the student.
Brittany is not a predator, and this was not between a young child and Brittany. This was a teenager.
Are you guys really blaming a 13-year-old boy as the victim in this case?
That's not what I said.
That's exactly what the statement sounded like. Are you honestly saying that Brittany was the victim?